Let's just have a bit of fun. We figure it out as we go. I'm going to take 20 minutes just telling you a little bit about how we work, because essentially how we work is how IDEO works. We've taken our offline process and put it online. So I'll give you a little bit of a flavour that when you walk out of here and sign up to Open IDEO, which I'm sure you're already immediately going to do, if you haven't done already, you'll know a bit about how this thing works. So we take a human-centred approach to design and change, and we call it design thinking. Our Lord and Master, CEO, Tim Brown, published a book a couple of years ago, and this is how he describes design thinking. So it's about accelerating innovation to create better solutions to the challenges facing businesses and society. It starts with people, what we call human-centred design, and applies to creative tools of design like storytelling with prototyping and experimentation to deliver new breakthrough innovations. So that kind of, in a nutshell, is what it's all about. It's a set of tools. It's not the new Six Sigma, as I've heard it referred to here in Singapore. It's more than a methodology. IDEO has 650 designers, and we're a bunch of designers who are applying these tools and methods, and we operate in a culture that enables us to flourish. I'm going to quickly walk through, really we talk about kind of 6 attributes. So it's not really a process, which is quite terrifying here. It's really, there are attributes of design thinking. When you bring these things together, this is what enables us to do what we do. So I'll walk you through each one quite rapidly. The first one, and I talk about this more in Singapore actually than in any other country that I do work in, because I spent 3 years now working with the government, and I don't think the government, to be honest, asks terribly good questions. Rather loaded, one might argue, some of them. Sorry, Brandon. So I'm going to give you an example of what I mean by how the importance of asking a good question, and this is something that we worked on last year. We've been doing some work with the National Population and Talent Division. This was actually around what they call population augmentation, which I love. So this is one of the areas that they look at. And the problem, which you will all be familiar with, is increasing tensions between Singaporeans and non Singaporeans. Feels quite odd for me being on the wall dealing with this. And the challenge they came to us with is how might we encourage local-born Singaporeans to accept new citizens as a part of the Singapore life? On the face of it, that seems like a perfectly decent question. However, as IDEO, this is what we heard. It's one-sided. Singaporeans' problem, not my problem as a foreigner. It was about local Singaporeans inviting non-Singaporeans in. So it's loaded. It's not mutual. The second thing that we heard was Singaporean family. And we know that this is a big debate going on in Singapore. What is even a Singaporean family in 2012? So it assumes that you know the answer to that, and it assumes that it's Singaporeans' problem to solve it. That can follow down that track and you'll get to some very, very different solutions than the challenge that we ultimately got into. How might we understand the social contract between Singaporeans and foreigners who live and work here? So what I'm saying is it's spending time on the challenge of crafting the question as designers was incredibly important to us. So it's not a big difference in the previous one you saw, but then everything's in the nuances. Mutuality is in there now. There are no assumptions about the Singaporean family, and you'll get to a much better space. That's the first thing. We spend a lot of time on challenges, and Brandon will know from the NEA that we spent a lot of time crafting the challenge that we launched on Open IDEO. Get inspired. Inspiration is not usually found in a meeting room, although in fairness, this is a particularly beautiful meeting room. But we don't sit around in our office, in meeting rooms, cogitating and feeling that we're inspired. This is how you get inspired. You need to go out into the world. And building on that idea, it's about people, right? I've never heard so much language about business process re-engineering as I have done here. Sorry, it's so 1990s. It's about people. That's who you're designing for. You're not designing for a process, you're designing for people, whatever you're designing, right? So people are also the source of your inspiration. Lots of this going on. And data's not a bad thing. I'm not here to say data's rubbish, don't use it. But I think data that's used to the extent that it often is actually destroys, sort of getting inspired and finding solutions. If you personalise this, if you talk about a gender and an age profile, I can't see anybody in that. I can't see Teddy in that. I can see data, I can see a profile. So what it's saying is less of this, more of this. I just want to make it a bit more tangible to you guys about, as IDEO we don't do quant data, but we use a lot of our clients' quant data, so we're not dismissing it. It does have some use. So, but to mark the differences, one is not better than the other. Actually, when you bring them both together, you get to a better output. So if we think about traditional market research, and by this I mean kind of quant surveys, big quant stuff that we do, it's actually pretty good at identifying the problem, and you can prioritise problems. So if you're the government, like the National Conversations is a great example actually. Quantitative research is what are the top 3 challenges at Singapore. It does that well. What it doesn't do is give you the answer. So observation actually inspires new ideas. It inspires the solutions to the problems. Focuses on explicit needs. Do you like? Don't you like? Actually, deep research focuses on latent needs. Things that I can't express. I have needs, but I don't know how to express those needs. That's what deep research does for you. Focuses on segments, socio-demographic profiles. Whereas actually observation focuses on individuals. We do think about profiles in its broadest sense, but then we think about the individuals we want to go and interview. Control settings, focus groups. I steadfastly refuse to go to a focus group and have done for about a decade now. I spent decades in them and they didn't do any good. Natural context. We go out and we see people. If we're doing the project at Changi Hospital, we spend time in the hospital. If we're doing the project around social assistance, low-income families, we spend time in their homes, understanding what it's like to live when you live on a low income in Singapore. Scripted interviews. We do have discussion guides, but we use it as a dynamic conversation. It's about a conversation. It is not a tick box exercise. Lastly, it's about quant gives you kind of objective data. 25% of people said X. Actually, as designers, we have to interpret data. Our data is stories, so you have to have a process of storytelling around it. Tying into the next one. The people-related stories. Less of this. Total fertility rates in Singapore. One of my favourite topics. Can't really engage with that, to be honest, as a citizen, so much. If I engage in this, I can get this. Young Singaporeans in love, I'm getting that. And actually we did do a project around fertility rates, and I just want to actually get across the notion that stories are data too. They're data points, all of these things. So these are 2 direct quotes that came from Singaporeans during our research. We talked about the benefits to the nation. I don't care about TFR, I'm not an economic tool. We didn't really know each other. It wasn't really love, we just had a shared desire to settle down. Bless. So it's not about 10% or 20% right, but it's rich data, nevertheless. So that's what we're talking about. Prototype to learn. This prototype is actually a Ford car that we built in IDEO London. Luckily it doesn't look quite like this now. It's prototypes. This has been done here in Singapore. The Northwest CDC and the Southwest CDC, one of them's moving, another one of them's refurbishing. So we helped them to prototype their new space. So rather than putting it down to a supplier, they wanted to think about the kinds of interactions they wanted to have with citizens. From research, citizens were telling us they felt very intimidated coming into a CDC. They didn't really want to be there. So it was all about how do we make the space less intimidating and make people less nervous when they come into it, but also protect from a staff point of view, safety. There are still certain considerations. So how can you create a win-win environment in the CDC? So this is one of the prototypes that they just built, just masking tape on the floor, tables, cool. Here's another prototype that they did. So this is actually them experimenting with a new role in the CDC, which is a service ambassador. So when people come in, they can be directed to help and the right kind of help by somebody, rather than looking at a switchboard or a kiosk to do it. And these over here are devil children, apparently. And the last one is around collaboration. This is what it's like when idea works. In fact, this is idea designers in the Bay Area.